Want to pray?
I will.
Sure, go ahead.
Father, we thank you for this opportunity to gather this morning. We thank you for Shabbat. We thank you for the peace and the rest that comes with that. And Lord, we just ask that you would bless this time. We ask your anointing to be on Johannes as he opens up your word and shares this Torah portion with us. And we just ask that we all have hearts and minds and just a strong desire to receive what you have for us this morning. And I ask it in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. It's exciting. So what do you normally do? What time do you guys normally finish?
9:45.
Quarter till?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Plenty of time. All right, so turn to Numbers chapter 16. Quick question, did you guys go over, Emma?
No, it's just using the computer audio.
Oh, just audio.
Technical difficulties, so.
All right, that's okay. Try to speak a little louder. Did you guys go over some of the last portions of chapter 15? Especially the tzitzit for holiness? Did you go over that with Paul?
No, we were just Caleb. We just discussed
Oh, you
that.
just talked about Caleb. Okay. Cool. Well, I do want to connect one thing for us with that since he didn't bring it up last week. So if you go back to Numbers 15, verse 37, let's look at that passage. I'm going to read it real quick, and I want to show you how it actually connects with the way that the spies responded to scouting out the land. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Bnei Israel, say to them that they are to make for themselves tzitzit on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and they are to put a blue cord on each tzitzit. It will be your own tzitzit. So whenever you look at them, you will remember at the mitzvot of Adonai and do them, and do not go spying out after your own hearts and your own eyes, prostituting yourselves. This way you will remember and obey all my mitzvot, and you will be holy to your God. I am Adonai your God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Adonai your God." So I think I just wanted to highlight two things right here. Right on verse 39, it says, "So whenever you look at them, you will remember all the mitzvot Adonai did for them, and not go spying out after your own hearts and your own eyes." So the connection right here is, he says heart, then eyes. Heart and eyes. So what did the spies do? The spies went out, they saw with their eyes, and they came back and spoke a bad report, right? So basically, what this portion is saying, though, is like this: when you put on the tzitzit, it's supposed to remind you of God's covenant, God's promises. God is brought his people out, and he wanted to dwell with his people, and he made a covenant with them, and he wanted to establish his kingdom in Israel, and Israel was to be a light to the nations. And so this was supposed to be a reminder of God's covenant to them and their covenant loyalty back to the Lord. So as they were seeing it, they would see this, they would be reminded of God's covenant within the heart, and then goes out through the mouth, right? Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So the problem that these leaders had, we know that this even today's Torah portion was a leadership problem. There was a huge problem with leaders. Israel had a leadership problem. So the 12 spies that went out were all leaders, right? They were heads of each tribe. And so when they came back, 10 of them gave a bad report, meaning what was in their hearts was fear so their eyes looked at something that was in the plain, which you see with their eyes. The land was filled with giants. And so that's covenantal faithfulness that actually overpowers what we see in our own natural eyes. So I just wanted to connect that for you guys. And since it's a leadership problem, it actually continues to Korah's rebellion. So did you guys want to add anything to that, Tom? I know there's more to the tzitzit than this.
I know I hadn't really thought about that. I like your connection to the leadership problem. I hadn't thought about how, like when you said that, it says that last week that a plague killed the 10 leaders
Yes.
with the bad report.
Right.
And so I hadn't made that connection that now each tribe had a void,
Right.
if you will.
Right.
And so here we see Korah and the sons of Reuben.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought about maybe they're having a kind of a leadership crisis,
Yeah.
and they're saying, well, they're fighting for, I don't know, like maybe there's, like you're saying, there is a leadership
There's a leadership
struggle
problem.
going on here. I hadn't really thought about that.
And really the biggest issue here is a whole generation had to wander in the wilderness because of believing this bad report that they brought in. So it caused them 40 years in the wilderness. So it seemed like it was not God's intention for them to wander, right? Like God's intention was that they would cross over, and God made this covenant with them at Sinai. He cut the covenant, and then he put his name upon the people. He's establishing this family order, right? Around the tabernacle. The Levites are supposed to serve the Lord and be this priestly representation of this priestly nation, right? And so, and yet this was God's intention to bring them into the promised land, which was Canaan, right? But because of bad leadership, the whole nation suffered. So they had to, 40 years, one whole generation had to die off so that the second generation would inherit the land. So, think about, in light of the Korah rebellion, think about how they are feeling right now, right?
Well,
Yeah, go for it.
Nisim had this good comment last week, but I wanted to point out something that gets a little lost, is that it's the leaders, but also the people.
Yep.
Because if you go back to 14, it says, verse 20, it says, the Lord answered, I have forgiven them just as you have spoken. Moses is asking that. As certainly as I live, and as certainly as the glory of Adonai fills the entire earth, none of the people who saw my glory and my miraculous signs I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet tested me these 10 times and did not obey my voice.
Right.
Not one of them will see the land I promised. So,
right.
It is massive leadership failure, but it's almost as if there was a chance for redemption.
Absolutely.
So it's not saying that it isn't a leadership problem failure. It is. But the people are also complicit.
Absolutely.
And the 10 times either refers to the 10 spies, or rabbinic tradition says this the 10 failures in the wilderness journey up to this point.
That's what I was also referring to.
Yeah.
I take it that way.
Because I think it's important that we see it, because it said that the they is all the people that did not obey his voice. So I'm saying that because I think it's also important. It's not just like, wow, 10 guys and all these people have to wander for 40 years.
Right. And
they're also complicit
to
the sin, is what I'm saying.
But strategically too, they did, the leadership failure was that they didn't come and leaderships didn't duke it out. They went to their own clans and they stirred up the people.
Totally.
So they stirred up, fear, and they weren't kind of like what I was saying earlier on, what was in the heart was not coming out from this covenant relationship with the Lord. They just were spewing out the things that they saw and were fearful. We know later on in Joshua, the reference in Joshua, that actually the people were afraid of Israel because they knew the God of Israel was with them, right? So they misrepresented the enemy's response. They took it upon themselves to attribute the enemy's response, which I think that was another failure, right?
Sure.
So the leaders, and complicitly with the people, they believed, and it's okay, because like it's okay to be afraid. Like Gideon was afraid, and I think it's okay to petition the Lord. Like the people look like giant, but then you kind of stir yourself up, and that's the covenant, relationship with the Lord. Like, well, you took us out of Egypt, you parted the sea, you defeated our enemies, you put the water back on the Egyptians, and you drowned, so these are monuments that have been built in this relationship that they have established. They've seen the Lord coming through for them, that was supposed to help them see the warrior side of the Lord. And so it was not about Israel's, right? It was not. It's because of God's sovereign choice and God's sovereign will that he wanted to use a tiny nation to demonstrate his glory. So it was really all about the Lord in one sense.
In addition to that, though, they lost the fear of the Lord, and they took the fear of man in front, and they put their fear in front of the fear of the Lord.
Yeah.
And what a lesson for our nation.
Yeah.
In so many points here.
Yeah.
I mean, losing our fear of the Lord, following certain leaders and not others. It's just like, wow,
Right.
what a lesson.
Right. So now we have a whole nation that is not going to be able to see the promised land, right? And then we have another problem. We have this Korah rebellion. But in order to understand the Korah rebellion, I think we have to go look at the genealogy and see what really is happening there, okay? So it starts out in chapter 16. Now Korah, son of Itzar, Levi, and the sons of Reuben, Dathan, and Abiram, sons of Eliab, son of Pelioth, rose up against Moses and took 250 men from Bnei Israel, men of renown who had been appointed to the council. All right, so let's not go further. Let's look at that now. You have Korah. So who was Korah? Which tribe did he belong to?
Levi.
Correct. Levi had how many sons? Testing your memories here. Yeah, 3, right? I got my little cheat sheet here.
You're thinking Aaron.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, all right.
yeah, Nadab and Abihu for Aaron, right? So Levi had 3 sons, right? So I did a little diagram. I don't know if you can see it here. So if this is the tabernacle, you're looking at the tabernacle from the top. You have the Merarites were going to be on the north side. You had the Kohathites who were going to be on the south, and then you have the Gershonites were on the west, and of course Moses and Aaron were on the east, right? And so Levi had 3 sons: Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Kohath would have been the second son of Levi, and Kohath had how many sons? Testing your memories again.
3.
He had 4, pretty close. So the first son was Amram, the second son was Izhar, third son was Hebron, and the fourth was Uzziah. And Amram had 4 sons, Aaron, Miriam, and Moses, right? Aaron probably the firstborn. I know it was 3 years I know Aaron was 3 years older than Moses, so Miriam would have been older than Aaron, technically. Because Miriam brought, remember that story where when Moses was on the river, so that would indicate that Miriam would have been older than Moses. So I'm trying to paint the picture of like family dynamics, right? The firstborn gets the first place and has more authority, but in God's economy, there's a little bit of a difference, right? Like David was the last born, and yet God's eyes was on David, not the firstborn. So same with Jacob, right? And the second son of Levi was Itzar, and he had 3 kids, Korah, Nepheg, and Zachir. So that would make Korah and Aaron, Miriam, and Moses cousins. So they were cousins. You're seeing this dynamic here where family, tribal, who has more authority, who gets to have the better position in terms of closeness to the Lord. You have these things kind of happening at the same time. Now the second people that rose against him were from the sons of Reuben, who were Dathan and Abiram. Now Reuben was the firstborn of Jacob, right? And Levi was the third born of Jacob. Judah was the fourth. So you see this family dynamic, and of course they were born of the same mom, right? They were all Leah's children. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah were born to Jacob from Leah. And yet at the same time, there's some sort of lineage, tribal conflict going on, because the firstborn is wanting the position, the esteemed position, and yet Levi now has the position of being really close to the presence of the Lord. You guys tracking?
Yeah.
So think about what really happened before this event. You have this tribal dynamics, and yet God was okay with it, because the beginning of Numbers in the Midbar, he did the census and he wanted the distinction, right? He was okay with it, with each tribes having their own allotted place, their own allotted service to the kingdom. And God wanted to have a family, and a family has designated chores for their children, right? It's interesting. I was actually thinking about this and trying to ask the Lord, how does this dynamic work in my own house? And usually I'll have, before homeschool, I'll have Elias vacuum the stairs, and Avi will clean the tables and sweep the kitchen floor, and Perez loves to spray, so we give him the job, right? The job of cleaning the windows, but he spends more time spraying, right? But at the same time, like my other 2 sons, they also like spraying, and so they're always vying to take that little spray bottle and take that job. And I was like, interesting. I could even see that. I mean, I wouldn't compare it to the tribes of Israel, but you see that it's sort of embedded in human nature, right? The sinful part of nature, where we want this envy of something that someone else has, right? This authority, this spiritual authority that someone coveting.
You can see that in workplaces. I want their job. I want to be.
Yeah. That's true. Do you have any?
That's just great. Very applicable. Selfish ambition, I was
Selfish
thinking.
ambition.
And envy, like you said.
Yeah.
Not satisfied and content with what the Lord has for you.
Right.
And Zig Ziglar one time said that, people want to take on other people's talents and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And he always said, well, what makes you think you're going to do something with somebody else's talent if you're not doing something, what God gave you, if you're not doing something with that?
Right.
So,
Right. So, I mean, when you look at, I mean, we can go back to Numbers chapter 4 real quick to see what the description there, the job description for the Kohathites would have been. So chapter 4, I mean, chapter 3, it also gives us the duties of, Gershon. At verse 25, it was to tend to the tents of meeting, the curtain, and the entrance of the tent. Then Kohath had the responsibility of taking care of the ark, the table, the menorah, the altar, and the implements of the sanctuary. And then Merari had the task of caring for the frames, and this is at verse 36, frames of the tabernacle, the crossbars, the posts, and the base of the equipment. And then when you go back to chapter 4, look at verse 15. It says, when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary, so when they uproot the tabernacle, there's an order of things that need to be done, right? So basically, Aaron and his sons would have to take all the holy elements and cover them up in blue. And once all that stuff is covered, then it says, okay, the sanctuary and all its holy implements. And when the camp is ready to move out, after this, the sons of Kohath may come to do the carrying, but they must not touch the holy items or they will die. Right? I mean, these are the tasks of the sons of Kohath with regard to the tent of meeting. And further down in 17, Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, you are not to let the families of the tribe of the Kohathites be cut off from among the Levites. Do this for them so that they may live and not die. So there's something in there, and Tom, you brought this up about, the holy elements of, is this idea of so that they won't die, right? We have to leave it in God's sovereignty, right? This is how the Lord orchestrated and ordained their task. And their task was supposed to be to carry the tables and the ark and the menorah and the altars, but they weren't supposed to touch any of the holy elements. If they did, they are to die. So God cares about their living or not living, right? And so from God's perspective, He's saying to Moses and Aaron, do this for them so that they won't die, so that they won't be cut off, right? So, but then the accusation that they brought, let's go back to Numbers chapter 15, 16. So the accusation that they brought was, verse 3, they assembled against Moses and Aaron. They said to them, you've gone too far. All the community is holy, all of them, and Adonai with them. Then why do you exalt yourself above the assembly of Adonai? Yeah, chapter 16, verse 3.
Is there another way of saying all the community is holy? Is he sort of saying all the community is able? Able to do these tasks? Is that what he's kind of saying? Or,
Well,
they're holy enough to be able to come in here and do this, do everything, and not be appointed certain things?
I think he's alluding to one truth, and the truth is Israel was a holy nation, right? So they were a kingdom of priests. They were holy unto God, right? Among the nations, right. Israel was supposed to be a priestly nation, calling the nations to the worship of God. They were to represent God. And yet God didn't just leave it at that. He also established a priesthood within Israel. So you have the tribe of Levi, who was supposed to be this priestly, the Kohanim, right? So maybe, Tom, if you want to add, what was the necessity of this priesthood? Israel was a priestly nation, and yet the individual Levitical priesthood, it gets into the, the sacrificial system, you know, when the priesthood interceded for the nations, they interceded for the person that sinned, the guilt offering, the fellowship offering. So all of these things, and the service of Adonai, right? They were to serve the Lord. They were to burn incense and take care of all the, make sure that the dwelling place of God is holy, kept holy.
But this is like, I'm
Sure.
sure, a very basic question. But, so you've gone far enough.
Sure.
Where did they go, or what did they do that these people considered, okay, that's enough? What did they do? Or
Right.
what did Aaron do?
And I think it's that it goes back to this family tension.
Okay.
The within the clan, right? The Korhites, Korah was the cousin of Aaron and Moses, and their accusation is basically, you guys are taking the priesthood, you're taking the cream of the crop type of service to the Lord. They're basically accusing, right? It seems that way, at least looking at the text. And so, you know, like when you have a company led by a family, you can see some dynamics in there and be like, oh, the family members get away with certain things, and yet the rest of the employees have different set of rules that they have to abide with. And so, from their perspective, looking from Korah's perspective, right? They're vying for, there's tension. Yeah, go ahead. You had more questions.
I totally get that.
Yeah.
I understand. But this Korah, isn't he a Levite?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't get what his problem is with this.
Right. But that's the very question, is like they were wanting more authority than God had given them. They were wanting more spiritual authority than God was allocating to them.
Wow.
That's because remember, Moses' response is, isn't it enough that you're already serving? Like, you're already so close to the presence of God. Like, why can't you be satisfied with that, right?
Good question. Okay, thank you.
No. Yeah, please.
Another way to translate you've gone too far.
Right. Yes.
So like, he's not okay with the amount that his cousins have.
Yeah.
And he wants that and feels like, similar to what you're saying about the genealogy and Reuben, the Reubenites too, were the firstborn.
We're the firstborn.
You know, all that is taking place, and it's, they're not okay with the really dramatic presentation of their role. I mean, this is really interesting to think about, like, because we've been talking about this in our congregation, our assignments.
Yeah.
And this is really hard to figure out, right? What are our assignments? What does God have for each one of us? And it takes a community to, like, figure this out together, because your assignments change and you have multiple assignments and all this stuff. And here we are. I mean, God's really dramatically clarified assignments. I mean, can you imagine if God dramatically showed up and he's like, here's what I want you and your family to do. And this is your assignment, right? It's like, well, that would be helpful, wouldn't it?
Right.
I mean, that doesn't happen to us today.
Right.
And yet here they are having a really clear assignment, and they're like, but I want that assignment.
Yeah.
You know, so we think if the Lord would just clarify my assignment, I would do it. Would we?
Right.
I just thought about that. Right?
That's really
Well,
interesting.
there's also a jealousy in that, because at the a little bit further down, he accuses Moses of putting himself above everybody else.
Yeah.
And, who are you to do this? Well, he's the prophet of God telling, speak it to the people on behalf of the Lord.
Right.
Which is what prophets do. And but his jealousy or his anger was towards Moses.
Right.
Which is the same being against God.
Right. It's interesting because Moses has this place of a prophet, right? Greater prophet than Moses, right? So Moses is considered as a prophet. Moses also is a Levite, so he's also a priest. And he's also functioning as a king, right? There, in terms of authority. So you see all that dynamic in Moses, and yet he got to see the Lord, Adonai, Yeshua, face to face. He had that intimate relationship with the Lord. And so from God's perspective, he's saying, this is my anointed one, and the Lord is the one who puts people in authority. And that's the challenge, is because when Korah revolts against God's chosen, God holds that personally because it's actually an accusation against him. Mm-hmm. It is God who puts spiritual leaders in authority. And so, I was sort of reminded of, like, this was the same situation with Miriam and Aaron, right? A couple of Parsha portions before, Miriam, was accusing, are you the only one who hears from the Lord? Like, we're also, so that even within his own sibling, like they struggled with this wanting more authority than was given to them. But I think the Lord's response is, no, be satisfied, be content with the authority that has been given to you, with the service that's been given to you. And it's very applicable to us today, right? Like the gift sets that the Lord has given us, the place and arena of sphere that the Lord has given us, we need to be content with that, right? And be open if the Lord's opening more doors of authority. But if we're not faithful with what we have in front of us, and if we're always looking to, for someone else's plate, the Lord's not going to obviously give us more spiritual authority. It's more like, correction is going to come, right?
Well, if we go down to verse 10, it also talks about, so he brought you close along with all your fellow sons of Levi, but you are seeking the priesthood too, which is Aaron, like
right.
he said.
Right.
And then therefore all your following are banded together against Adonai. And so that's a big part of why the Lord came against him in such a way.
Yeah, exactly.
I hadn't thought about the genealogy and this like this. Have you ever thought about the fact that Moses' children were not priests?
Right. Interesting.
He was God to the people with all these things, like you were saying,
Right.
prophet, priest, and but then his children, they weren't even Kohanim.
Right.
It's interesting.
Well,
I mean,
was
it
his
wasn't
wife.
Moses' son that was chosen to lead him into the promised land, it was Joshua.
Yeah, well, Joshua's not even a Levite, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's kind of interesting.
So that's why I was saying, yeah.
God does what he wants.
Right, yeah. It wasn't Moses' idea, right?
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah,
He's
that's
like
what-
at the burning bush, he's like, I don't think so.
But God chooses those who are obedient. Joshua was obedient.
True.
And was Moses' sons also mixed with the Gentiles? Was his wife, yeah, were they Jewish? Were they
I don't
Israel?
know if it
Were
was
they
a-
Israelite? Was
Yeah.
she? Okay. So she was an Israelite.
No, it doesn't really
Yeah.
matter in some sense. They would
Yeah.
have intermarried and been a part of.
Yeah, but I'm just saying maybe it's because of that
I don't
intermarriage.
think so.
I mean, look at
Intermarriage,
Caleb,
weren't-
right?
They weren't considered-
intermarriage isn't a negative.
Oh, I'm not saying it is, but that may be the reason they weren't considered priests.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think that's a disqualifier. I mean, look at Yeshua's line, right?
Right.
He has Gentiles in his line as their highlights. So I don't think that's
Right.
I don't think that's a negative. I think it's
Yeah, I guess if you look at Ruth and so forth.
right.
Yeah.
Intermarriage is only bad when it's pagan. So it's only prohibited when you're talking about marrying pagans.
Yeah, okay.
But
Well, it's good clarification.
I think for me it's more of a, we don't even really hear about Moses' children. You hear about Aaron's.
That's true.
His sons are killed, and then some, become
Right.
the high priest, but that's also a challenge for him.
Yeah.
It
Would have been. I was even thinking about how, you remember when Moses was so depressed with the amount of work, and he prayed, and the Lord said, choose 70, right? So he picked 6 from each tribe, and ended up being 72. So they cast lots and forgot their names. The two that remained in the camp, and so the Spirit of God rested on the 70, and they began to prophesy, right? And even those that were back in the camp were also prophesying. And I was actually looking at Moses' response there, and his desire was that all would even prophesy, right? So you see in the nature of Moses that he wanted them to have more experience with the Lord, right? But the accusation that came against him did not really seem to match the character of Moses also, right? Can you see, Moses' heart is I wish all could prophesy, right? It's the same principle that Paul was saying. It's I wish all could speak in tongues or prophesy.
Right.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, because he was burdened with everything. He's like, Lord, help me.
Lord,
And
help
the Lord's
me.
like, I'll take some of that spirit and give.
Yeah.
That's good. So it shows his heart wasn't to be the.
Yeah.
Well, no, he said,
Big guy at the top.
choose somebody else. I don't want this thing.
Right.
Yeah. But they were, but Korah, because they're blinded by, this lies and vying for authority, jealousy, they couldn't hear of this man,
Yeah.
their own cousin.
Moses always had a heart for God, what this God wanted. It's like
Yeah.
God superseded everything, and just the way he's supposed to. Doesn't make sense.
Right.
Moses even says something funny. He says a lot of funny things.
He does.
Like his conversations with the Lord says, if I have found favor in your eyes, kill me, please. Like that is an amazing prayer. If I have had favor in your eyes, kill me, please.
Yeah.
Because he's saying I can't carry the weight of this.
Yeah.
Help me.
Yeah.
I need help.
Yeah.
I never juxtapose that with that's really good.
Yeah. Because it really shows, Moses' heart. He was not this authoritarian leader.
Right.
He was just following the Lord. And the more you spend time with the Lord, the more you have the Lord's heart, right? So he spent a lot of time with Yeshua face to face at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And I said that on purpose because it's Yeshua.
This whole thing with Korah, it's almost like he was stating a truth. Yes, all of Israel is holy.
Yeah.
But it's the way the enemy comes and takes a truth and twists it.
Yes.
Even in our own lives, he'll take a truth
Yeah.
and he'll twist it, but it's not the Lord.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's
really good. Very good.
That's the word there is actually kedoshim.
Oh.
Usually we translate it holy ones, right, or the saints. It's like, well, we're all saints. We're all the holy ones. We're all the kedoshim.
So, something might have just clicked, so let me ask you.
Sure.
Okay, the tribe of Levi was considered the tribe of the priests,
Uh-huh.
but that does not mean that all Levites were priests.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm a Levite, how come I'm not a priest? That's his problem.
Exactly.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So the ones that were not priests, what did they do?
They had chores, right? This is a family dynamic here where God's giving specific tasks for his children. And so he gave the tribe, the Kohathites, which would have been Korah and his clan, they would have been responsible for taking the like the ark and we looked at that in chapter 4. And their responsibility would have been like the ark, the table, the menorah, the altar, and the sanctuary. So they took care of all those things.
So they worked around the temple, but they just were not priests per se.
Exactly. And what they were vying for was they were wanting this priesthood. They wanted to offer, the sacrifices and the altar, and burn the incense,
And the priests were descendants of Aaron, who was also a Levite.
who was also a
But
Levite.
only the Aaron Levites were the priests.
Correct. Yeah. So before you came, I kind of gave this analogy just briefly that Levi had 3 sons: Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, and then Kohath had 4 sons: Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. And Amram had 4 sons, which would have been Aaron, Miriam, and Moses. And Izhar had 3 kids: Korah, Nepheg, and Zachir. So Korah and Aaron would have been cousins.
Mm-hmm.
So they were all Levites, but within vying for more authority, more, I guess, closeness to the Lord or something.
You wanted a promotion.
Wanted a promotion.
Kind of like us.
Yeah.
We're not like that.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So,
Praise God.
Lord help us.
Amen. Have mercy there.
Tim.
Would you comment on the magnitude of this rebellion in
Yeah.
the sense that we reference back to Aaron
Yeah.
and Miriam, and this was, they're saying, little brother, what makes you so hot? But this, and we think about Korah, but there's 250 leaders.
Yes.
I don't know how big this council was, but there's 250 of this council, these men of reputation,
Yeah.
who are in on this. It's not just
Yeah.
Korah saying, hey, I'm from Levi and I want to be a priest too. We got a larger rebellion
Amen. It's true.
than just a couple people saying, hey, I want to have a staff meeting and say I'm upset.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of a church split. Huh.
Pretty much. It doesn't even end at the 250, right? Because the next day, what happens? That seed, that negativity that was sown in, actually gave birth to the whole Bnei Israel sort of grumbling against the Lord, which caused 14,700 people to die. So that's close to, more than 15,000 people that died in 2 days.
So were all the sons of Korah wiped out?
No,
Because
no,
I look, you look at the Psalm.
right. Yeah, so, interestingly, the Kohathites had a major role in the temple services. We look at Chronicles 15, it talks about they led songs and praises to the Lord. And they had let's see. During the David reign. Yeah, they had more responsibilities. I'm blanking out here, but so meaning that clan continued to serve in the temple. Like they were prophesying, they were praising the Lord. But this revolt, this issue that they had needed to come to an end, and I think that's why, as we progress down into this chapter, we'll see the Lord put an end to it by the Aaron's staff budding, right? That there's a lot of analogy there, typology that's actually quite beautiful.
I would say it's an important point,
Yes.
because when he kills his family, it seems like, wow, the kids, like, what, were they complicit or not? But then we find out that actually some of his sons lived and write some of the Psalms. And so we actually know that God spared some of the kids, and some of the kids weren't okay with the rebellion of their father. So that's a really cool and important part too, similar to hey, it's not like they all just got punished for 40 years. No, they were complicit. And so apparently the children are even complicit. And so when you see other stories like Achan, when you go into the land and with Joshua, it's like, and they kill the family, it seems like, man, that's harsh. But then you see this story, and actually you can see that, no, they didn't have to be complicit. Apparently there was a way.
Yeah.
Then God would have, he knows the heart, and so he spared if there was a good heart there. And if not, you go down into Sheol alive.
Right.
It's a pretty dramatic death.
Matter of fact, the Lord made a way for them to be rescued, right? Because you look at the text, and the text says, it says in verse 20, then Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among the assembly, so that I might consume them at once. So the Lord not only gave them a chance of one day to think about it, right? Now we'll go back and look at how the Lord dealt with Dathan and Abiram. That's a little bit different, the Reubenites. But when it came to Korah and the 250, like Tim was saying, right? They conspired, and these were heads of and renowned leaders, right? So that means they had more authority to speak into the community. So they probably spread a lot of negativity, conspiring against God-appointed leaders, right? So, and yet, like Moses gave them one day, right? Like, bring the censers tomorrow. And I see that as God actually giving them a day of repentance. You know, God's, because it fits his personality. That's who God is. He's slow to anger, abounding in hesed, but not leaving the guilty unpunished. So his mercy is like, even when they're bringing this ginormous accusation, which is an accusation of God, because they're saying, we don't trust you. It's, in essence, it's basically saying we don't trust God, when they didn't trust in God's anointed. And yet God was merciful. He gave them a day. And further on, not only a day, but he also gave them a chance to move away from Korah's camp, right? Matter of fact, the Lord was going to wipe out the clan, but Moses, being the intercessor that he is, he interceded. He's always falling on his face. What a leader, right?
Yeah.
Lord, help us. Yeah. So
yes. You're, both of you kind of said, so here it's clear that he gives them a chance to repent. So in your comment earlier, are you saying that that even though it doesn't say it maybe in other instances, it was probably there? I mean, because I have people that in my life that have a real problem with, God being in genocide. He just wipes them all out.
Yeah.
But this is good because you can say, well, here's an example, even though it doesn't say it in every single instance.
Yeah.
And to look at the character of God, that
Exactly.
he would not,
Because even beyond that, I think there's usually the principle of God's pretty clear about laying out the ground rules, before he takes action. He's like, if you like later on, like if you want to be blessed, you do this. If you want to be cursed, you do this. Like he's not trying to trick him. Like he tells them what the expectation is, and he tells them the consequences. So I think that even just goes with what you're saying of like, we don't always have the specific of I'm giving you a day to repent. It's like he's laid out the requirements beforehand, and they know that because they're living in this and they're reminded of it. So the consequences are clear, I think, and like they know what God is expecting, and they know what he tells them the consequences. So he's not.
And yet there's a lot of weight on leadership too,
Yeah.
because even leaders of families, you take care, you obey here, so you protect your family,
Right.
as well, and all your kids and wives don't die.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's true.
That's why it's important yet to read the whole Bible.
Yeah.
Because you take one little story and it doesn't always give you would never know that Korah's sons wrote some of the Psalms unless you read the Psalms.
Yeah.
So it's just you
Right.
you have to read more and you can just
Keep reading.
keep reading, you know.
Yeah.
It says in Genesis 15, it says, or maybe it's 17, that the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet right. He says to Abraham, when he's covenanting with Abraham about the land, that won't happen for over 400 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So God even there is saying, I'm giving the Amorites, and I think that just means probably all the Canaanites, I'm giving them a chance, but because their iniquity hasn't got to this point. But then it gets to some point. And it's like the children just keep repeating the sins of the fathers.
Yes.
And it's actually more merciful
Yes.
to bring that judgment than it is to continue to allow that wickedness
Yes.
to be imparted into the next generation, the next generation, the next generation.
That's good.
I'm glad you brought that out, because I was also saying that in our home group, that the the defilement that is brought upon the land, like it says, the land will spew you out, right? Leviticus 18, the land spews them out because it's been so defiled with sin and idolatry, but yet
Talking about the Gentiles.
Gentiles.
It's talking about the Canaanite nations that get
Right.
spewed out because of their wickedness. So like you said, they had to have known somehow. You see it in Torah. You see King Abimelech or Abimelech. He's like, with Abraham, it's like I was going to sleep with your wife, and you said it was your sister, and like, what does he care about adultery?
Right.
Yeah.
Right? But somehow he understands that wasn't kosher.
Right.
Right? This is before the Torah, this is before Mount Sinai, and he's a Gentile.
Wow. That's really good.
So somehow God is revealing himself, right?
Conscience.
Yeah.
Wasn't it in a dream?
I don't know if it's up the dream or not. I'm not sure, but there's several stories. Now there are many stories where you see God was revealing his principles, and how did they know? Why is Cain judged? Did God ever say you can't kill your brother?
Right.
It doesn't say that in the text. But clearly, he wasn't okay,
Yeah.
Well, maybe we were all born with the voice in us. That doesn't mean you're going to listen. It doesn't mean you're going to be receptive to the voice.
Yeah.
the breath of God.
Yeah.
All
Image bearers, yeah.
Image bearers.
He said eternity in our hearts, so he's eternity. I mean,
It makes me in awe of God's mercy. He's so merciful that even with Cain, right, he warns him. He says, sin is crouching at your door, right?
yeah.
So you always see the judgment of the Lord coming with this mercy side. And they're like this flip side of the coin type of reality, right? The Lord's speaking to the serpent, right? Bringing judgment to the serpent. You're gonna be on your belly for the rest of, you're gonna be the most whatever. And the Lord in that midst, it says in Genesis 3, he prophesies of the seed that would crush the head of the serpent. You see the same thing here. In the midst of pronouncing judgment over the rebellion, Korah's rebellion, he's also making a way for that final point of like, stay away from the camp, and the Lord's giving opportunity to be saved. So that shapes, because the Torah is supposed to be instructional, right? What does this tell us about the nature of God? When we see calamity coming, when we see the coronavirus happening, when we see wars happening, when we see exiles and things like that, how do we interpret? How do we look at God? And how does that inform when things even get harder before the return of Yeshua? Right? So this is instructional for us that his mercy, if he was not just to judge the iniquity, he wouldn't be a just God, right? And yet he's so merciful, he gives opportunity to the last minute. So, yeah. Amen. So now let's look at verse 12, and let's look at Moses' response to Dathan and Abiram. Then Moses sent word to Dathan and Abiram, son of Eliab, that they said, "We will not come. Isn't it enough that you brought us from the land flowing with milk and honey, only to kill us in the wilderness? And now you would lord it over us. What more? You haven't brought us into the land flowing with milk and honey, no vineyard. Would you now gouge our eyes out of those men? We won't come." Then Moses became very angry and said to Adonai, "Do not accept their offering. I haven't taken from them a single donkey, nor have I wronged one of them." What do you guys think about Moses' response here?
Is that a trick question?
No, as a leader, I'm actually challenged by this, right? Because there's two contexts, like his response with Korah and the 250 is a little bit different when it came to the Reubenites here.
Well, he doesn't fall on his face over this one.
True,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
it's true. So I was really having a hard time, like why did he respond this way? Like, was this, I mean, the Lord responds, right? Like he responds to him.
Was this before the Lord gave instructions that a man can cancel before sunset any covenant that his wife makes that he doesn't agree with, or after?
Well, that would have been at Sinai, right? It's part of the instruction given, so it would have been after.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of it.
Oh, you know what?
Mhm.
Sorry,
Go for
just,
it.
I'm thinking this out. But when I started rereading 12, they're really coming against God.
Mhm.
Because God is the one that promised them this stuff.
Right,
And Moses may have been the spokesman, so,
right.
and then it's also, isn't it after what had happened with Korah,
Mhm.
and maybe this is where he's fed up. This is it. Maybe, was this when he prayed, "Just kill me"?
Oh, that was a different.
That was a different one.
Yeah.
But I mean, I just feel his, like hopeless, these people, these people.
Right.
Well, aren't they accusing Moses when it says, "I haven't taken a single donkey"?
Right.
With the inheritance, they were actually accusing Moses of stealing a portion of their inheritance, were they not? In this, where it's like, you haven't given us this, if he's saying, "I haven't even taken a donkey for them," so it was like, whereas with Korah's accusation had more to do with, "We want your job," it seemed like this accusation was more,
Yeah.
Moses is stealing from us almost with the inheritance thing.
It's really interesting you say that because Reuben was the firstborn, right?
Mhm.
Levi is the third.
Mhm.
And so, and yet, remember what happened in Genesis, that Reuben sleeps with Jacob's concubine,
Mhm.
Bilhah, and he loses, was it Genesis 49, right? Yep, 49:3. Reuben, my firstborn, that was extra dignity. Yeah, it says, "Like water boiling over, you will not have extra, for you got up into your father's bed when you defiled a maid's couch." So there's something about what he did there that had consequences that affected his firstborn status. So once again, it goes back to this clan. They're duking it out, right? Reuben feels entitled. I think Dathan and Abiram, I think their spirits was not teachable. At least in Korah, like they brought a little bit of truth there, but they were blinded with some lies. It seems to me from the text that Dathan and Abiram, they were already like hardened, like their hearts was already hardened, and not willing to present a reasonable argument. They weren't even willing to come to the table. They were just ready to.
Yeah, I won't even come.
Won't even come, right? It seems a little bit arrogant of a response. And I think you're right. The Lord's taking it, as though, it was towards Him, towards the Lord. So,
I think, it's interesting with the Korah. The kind of the scary part of the story is that he and his cronies, they think they're right. This isn't we're secretly trying to, we see this a lot in the family of Messiah. Like people are genuinely deceived, right?
Absolutely.
Like he is genuinely deceived, so much so, he's like, yeah, I'm going to bring my censer out to the Lord tomorrow, and we're going to show all the people of Israel who's right.
right,
And then, right?
right.
It's like, whoa, whereas it seems like, it's hard because we don't get a whole lot of information, but with the Reubenites, it's like,
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know, they're not even going to come out. So, do they know something? Or do they not really think they're right?
Yeah.
Because they know the story of their great-grandfather
Right.
and what he did.
Right.
Oh, I don't know. Whereas this designation of the Levite brothers or sons, really,
Right.
is the tension. I don't know if I'm being clear in what I'm saying.
No,
Is that-
it makes a lot of sense.
there's
Helpful.
something there that they're like realizing, but they still don't seem to be repenting.
No.
Right? It's just this cold, dark, and then Moses is like, don't even.
Yeah.
If they do bring an offering,
Yeah.
Well, and doesn't it seem like Korah or the Levites, this was about status.
Right.
With Reuben, it was about land and inheritance. That seems to be their bigger argument, was what's rightfully ours. Where the Levites were like, they wanted the status thing, but this, to me, it seemed like it had more to do with, give us that land you told us about. It was more of a possession thing rather than a status thing. So it seemed like there was two different dynamics going on there.
Yeah.
the Levites don't get land and
Yeah,
inheritance
exactly.
in that
So-
same sense that the other tribes
So
do.
for them, it was a status thing. They just wanted status, where the other ones give us our stuff.
Right. And I've also wondered, why would, Moses respond and say, I haven't taken from them a single donkey, nor have I wronged one of them. So in Judaism, there's this sense of, the nations, the kings would not have any concern for the people's things, right? So they just take whatever they want. But God's economy is completely different, right? The king is actually supposed to meditate on the Torah, and the king is actually under the Lord's sovereignty. So there's nobody above the Lord. So there's something about that, and I think the Haftorah portion also mentions that, where Saul says the same thing.
And Samuel makes the same point. What have I done? I
Right.
forgot the text, but he makes the same point. Doesn't he, I think?
He does.
Yeah.
He does. Yes.
Well, if Reuben was the firstborn and he lost his inheritance, there could have been some resentment of Moses
Yes.
for having the higher position, because that would have been their position.
Yes.
And they said, you're lording it over us. And so they could have had some generational resentment against not having that top position. And Moses' response was, well, if I'd been lording it over you, I I would have been taking
Right, taking,
money from everybody,
right,
but I haven't.
But I
So
haven't.
you're wrong.
that's good.
Mhm.
That's a really good way to look at it.
There's an interesting passage in Exodus 13. It says after they come out of Egypt, or as they're coming out, really, it says it's about the redemption of the firstborn. Because every firstborn donkey you were to redeem with a lamb, and if you do not redeem it, then you are to break its neck. But you are to redeem every firstborn male among your sons. I don't know if Moses is referring to this, but there seems to be this connection to redemption of the firstborn, who's Reuben,
Right.
and this fact that he's saying, but I don't know exactly what, there's something connected here. Help me out, somebody.
Why hadn't Moses taken a single donkey from them? Did he see this coming?
I don't think he did.
Then why didn't he take anything from them?
Well, that would be because he would be acting just like the kings of the nations. The way I would see that, I think, Tom, your interpretation is really good. I think you're alluding to something really good that we want to look at. But Israel is supposed to be different, right?
Okay.
So kings, and in a sense, like Moses had authority in the camp, right? But he didn't usurp authority. He didn't overreach authority. And so basically he's saying, I haven't brought any harm to the Reubenites. I'm only following the Lord. I haven't harmed the Reubenites. Why are they bringing this accusation to me?
Yeah.
I think that's the heart behind it, at least the way I look at it.
Okay, see, I thought they were saying, I'm not accepting their sacrifice. But he wasn't taking anything from anybody.
Right.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think it had to do with the firstborn reality, because Reuben felt entitled because he was the firstborn. So that resentment, that family feud going on, vying for the place of most authority, and so if you don't have that generational healing, you can tell, like, to the third, fourth generation, they're still dealing with this mindset, which is really applicable to us today, right? What is passed on from generation to generation, we believe the things that we were taught, and so, like, there needs to come a time when we start cutting ties with things that don't line up with the Lord. And that's why we go back to the Numbers 15 context, that we go to covenant with the Lord. So we move from the heart to the eyes, or from the heart to the speaking of, if that makes sense.
A
Couple minutes. Any final thoughts you guys want to bring out?
Contagious, infectious disease,
Yeah.
something you've got, I know. Rebel, you die, you've got something in there.
Well, wow.
One of the best
Darash.
one of the best ones we've ever had was Emma on this portion years ago.
It was the first one I ever did.
It was
Wow.
and I still remember it. I mean, it's,
Yeah. Well, actually, the connection that I was kind of making that I hadn't really made before is, and you kind of got close to it, but it's talking about, they want authority. They're trying to kind of usurp authority here. I was thinking back, it just reminded me back of Genesis 3, and you talked about a different part of Genesis 3, but it reminded me of when the serpent says to Eve, when you eat of the fruit of the tree, you'll become like God, knowing the knowledge of good and evil. And ultimately, because they're trying to take the authority that God has put in place, this whole rebellion is about them trying to say, we know better than God. We can be like God. So it's this care. It's like, to me, I was just seeing the underlying context and underlying continuation almost of this deception of, you don't need to listen to authority. You don't need to follow what God has put in place. You can be like God. You can know that you can judge the good and evil. And so I was just making that connection of that it's just that evil that comes from the fall of, like, which I think is even countered by, you know, we've also talked about the mercy of it. You know, eventually Korah's line is redeemed, and they get to, you know, they still get to have their role.
Right.
But it's also like it shows like in like God sets up this system of delegated authority where Moses is this main authority, but Aaron is the line of the priest. It's like, and it's like this humility.
Yeah.
That counters the deception of you can be like God and make all your own decisions. But when God sets up authority, it's based in humility and delegation of authority and submission. So I think I hadn't made that full connection back to that deception in the garden, and I was just kind of seeing that as, even as people were talking, that this is kind of you can see that juxtaposition of the people are deceived, and but God's authority is there, and God's judgment comes, and it's good. And I mean, it's hard to see the passage of the earth opens up and swallows up the people, but he warned them. Like it's still like we see his mercy. He wanted them to turn.
Yeah.
He always is looking for redemption, but at some point he's God and we're not.
Well, he doesn't like us going against his authority that he's appointed. So God's anointed is something that we need to be careful of.
Yeah.
Because God's power is behind it. It'd be interesting to see what he does with all the rebellion today.
You read it to the end of Revelation.
Just to emphasize the need for the priesthood, that,
We're close.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Verse 39 of chapter 16, Eliezer the Cohen collected, is that when it started, or, I must be in the wrong place, but when Moses told him, hurry and put the censers in, to stop the plague against them, and so it was up to them, to the priesthood, to hurry and stop the plague. And every time Moses prays to Adonai to stop his hand, if we didn't have the priesthood, where would we be? Eventually, we're going to go on because we're human. I guess eventually, I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of that. Every time I think about what I feel, I think, well, we're human, like they were human. Like you read how many times they went against God or failed, but we're human. Where would we be without the priest who hurry up and go before God to stop the hand of God, the plague against us, and to plead our cause before God?
That is so good. I'm glad you pointed that out, because can you imagine the process it takes to make that atonement sacrifice until the plague is stopped? It's weighty. It's weighty.
It's good in our need for one another to intercede for each other when we're being stupid.
Yeah.
You know, like, wow, I want somebody else praying for me. You know, like
for the nation, for one another.
Pray for leaders.
Pray for our leaders.
Pray for the leaders.
Yeah.
Better make friends with the leadership.
Yeah.
Amen. Well, Lord, we just want to thank you for your presence in our midst. Thank you for revealing your heart to us. Thank you for showing us just more of who you are and what you are doing in this earth and what you feel about authority and how you view your delegated authority. Lord, I thank you for this discussion this morning. I just pray that you would continue to open our hearts to worship and to be in your presence. Lord, speak to us. Continue to receive our praise. Lord, delight in us as we could go into worship together corporately and pour out your spirit upon us. Open up our lips so that our mouths may declare your praises. L'Shem Yeshua. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Your Honor.